I want you to ask yourself a question. If you felt like God was asking you to do something, but what he was asking you to do didn't make any sense and it seemed crazy, would you do it? This is a very personal story, and originally it's a story that I didn't plan on sharing, but my thought is if my story can impact one person and lead them towards Christ, then I have no reason not to share my story. So in 2004, I was watching The Passion of the Christ, and during that movie, I'm sitting there watching the movie, and I heard God talk to me. And what God was saying to me was, I want you to build a cross and carry a cross down King Street. And when I heard God tell me this, my first thought was probably the exact thought that you're thinking right now. That's nuts. That doesn't make any sense. Why would God ask you to build a cross and carry a cross down King Street? So I told God no, and I didn't do it. And I thought about it a lot over the next coming weeks, and periodically I would have the thought coming in my head that I remember God had told me to do that, but I brushed it off and said, no, I'm not doing that. That's nuts. Why would I do that? People will think I'm crazy. So a lot of time went by, and over the years, I actually grew in my faith and got closer with God. I've heard God speak to me a few more times, and I've had God give me confirmation of what he's told me, in many different ways when I've heard him speak to me. And fast forward to 2016, I was outside doing some yard work. I was about a month after I had gotten ACL surgery, so I think it was my first time back outside doing some yard work, and I was listening to a message on my headphones, and as I'm listening to the message, I heard God speak to me again. I want you to build a cross and carry a cross. I thought back to that time he had told me to do that before, but I'm a little bit different now. I understand, and I've read a lot of stories, and actually, God has actually asked people to do things a lot of times that doesn't make any sense, and it doesn't make sense to us, but it makes sense to God, and we don't really understand why he's asking us to do these things sometimes, but sometimes he does ask you to do things that don't make sense. So as I heard God tell me he wanted me to build a cross and carry a cross, I stopped and looked up at him, and I said, okay, God, I'll build a cross and carry a cross. I'll do it. Where do you want me to carry this cross? When do you want me to carry this cross? So God responded to me. He said, I want you to build a cross, and I want you to carry it from your house to your church, and I want you to do it the Thursday before Good Friday of the upcoming year. So that was a ways away. I had quite a few months to recover from my surgery. So I said, okay, God, I'm gonna start building a cross. So time went by. I bought some cedar wood. I made it out of cedar so it's not too heavy, so I could, carry it without struggling a long distance, because it's about a 20-mile distance from my house to my church. So I built my cross, and I made it 12 feet long by 8 feet wide, and I mounted a wheel to the back of it so it could roll. I got ready to carry my cross. As the time was approaching where I was planning to carry the cross, I was having some complications with my recovery of my knee. I've got some nerve damage in my knee, and my foot's numb and weak, and I can't push off on it very good. I've got a lot of pain in the front of my knee from where they took from my patella tendon to use for my new ACL. As time's approaching, I'm worried that I'm not going to be able to carry this cross. And I'm talking to God, and I'm saying, God, how am I going to carry this cross 20 miles? I can't jog. I can't run. It hurts when I walk. How am I going to carry this cross 20 miles? And God gave me the verse in 2 Corinthians 12 where he talks about his strength is perfected in our weakness. And that's exactly what I needed. And I felt like that was just straight from God, and that comforted me, that verse. And it's re-strengthened me and re-energized me. As the date approached, my wife was worried about what I was planning to do, and she was skeptical that God had actually told me to do this. And she would say, how do you really know God told you to do this? And I'm like, I don't know. I just know it's from God. I know it when God talks to me, and that God had asked me to do this. So that Monday, before I was planning to walk, I downloaded a sermon from a church that I listen to on a regular basis. And the title of the message was The Cross. And the message was given by a guest speaker, and he had been at the church, I think 2 times before, but he was the guest speaker the week before I was planning to walk with the cross, and he was actually a guest speaker that has carried a cross all over the world in many different countries, and his whole message was about his experiences carrying the cross. So I listened to this message, and this message definitely strengthened me and was an encouragement to me before I was planning to carry this cross. So I sent the message to my wife, and she listened to the message, and she got word from God while she was listening to the message that was her confirmation she needed, and she was on board and understood what I was doing now. So Wednesday evening, The night before, I'm planning to walk with the cross. I go to bed and I don't set my alarm. I'm planning on waking up whatever time God wakes me up, because he knows better than me what time I need to leave. And he woke me up around 3 a.m, and I didn't know if it was just me being eager or excited to leave, or if this was God waking me up. So I tried to go back to sleep, but I was so awake. I was more awake than I ever am. So I jumped out of bed and got ready, and I left. I left shortly after 4 a.m. in the morning, and I didn't know why God had me leave so early, because I planned for it to be about a 7-hour walk, which would put me at the church around 11 a.m. if I left at 4 a.m. and my walk went according to my plan. So I left and went on my walk, and I still wasn't sure why God was having me do this, but I set off on my journey carrying the cross. I went down my street and got down US 1, and walked all the way down US 1, down the south end of St. Augustine, all the way past State Road 312. When I passed State Road 312 near Destiny Church, I got on some back roads and went back towards King Street, and then I walked down King Street. And actually, while I was on King Street, I had an opportunity to stop and pray with some guys. Had a couple guys that I prayed with, and another gentleman saw me praying with this one man, and he asked me if I could come over and pray with him. And then I walked over, and there were some more guys sitting over there hanging out, and they asked me to come over and pray with them. So it was actually a really cool experience, and people were really welcoming, and I had a lot of people looking at me very funny, like, what is this guy doing carrying a cross? Does he think he's Jesus? Like, what is he doing? I had a couple people, honk and wave and give me thumbs up and stuff like that. Overall, if anybody asked me, what are you doing out here? My answer was just a short answer. I'm doing what God told me to do. So I continued to carry my cross, and I, about halfway through my journey, was a little past State Road 16, and this part of the first half of the journey planned to be on regular streets and roads, and then the second half of my journey was going to be from State Road 16 to 9 Mile Road, or World Golf Village Drive. And how I was going to get from State Road 16 to World Golf Village Drive was walk through the woods, which is called the 12 Mile Swamp, and it actually has dirt roads that go through the woods in this conservation area called the 12 Mile Swamp. This part of the journey, the second part of the journey, was going to be just time between God and myself. And as I started out on this second part of the journey, I had made pretty good time. I was a little bit behind schedule that I had planned being on, but I was still making good time. But when I started this second part of the journey, it was a lot hotter than I had planned on it being, and I started drinking a lot more fluids than I planned on drinking. And as the sun, rose up in the middle of the day heat, and it got hotter, and I started to drink more, and I'm walking down these roads that are sandy roads, and the walking's a lot harder, and some of the streets, or some of the roads you go down, the dirt roads, have had trees that have fallen down over the streets, and you got to navigate over those. So it was a lot harder walk than I had planned on doing. And about halfway through my journey through the woods, I started to run out of fluids. Shortly after that, I didn't have any fluids left. I started to get really, really thirsty as I walked. And as I walked, it got more difficult. I got more tired. I was sore. And by the time I was getting through and getting close to the end of my journey in the 12 Mile Swamp, I was kind of at the most difficult point I'd been. And by the time I got through and finished, it was actually the most difficult thing I'd ever done. And I was extremely dehydrated, extremely thirsty, just kind of extremely broken down and just beat and tired. And I got to the end of the swamp and I sat down, and I'm just so thirsty. I don't know if you've ever been to the point where you're just so thirsty you would do anything for a drink of water. I have a friend that works on a truck, and I saw one of the trucks drive by 9 Mile Road, and I said, oh man, maybe that's one of my friends. Maybe he has like a half a bottle of water or something on his truck. I can just get a sip of water. I said, let me try to call him, which, there's probably 50 trucks that work for this company, so the chances of it being him were slim, and it wasn't him. So I'm sitting there and I'm so thirsty, and I don't pray. I didn't pray at this time, but I received a message from my father-in-law, a text message, and he asked me, how are you doing? Do you need anything? And I had kept in contact with my wife a couple times throughout the day, and I knew that my father-in-law was supposed to be on the south end of the town playing golf at a golf course that's near my house where I was originally starting my journey, but he wasn't there. He said his shoulder was bothering him, so he was coming home. And his home was in the area that I was sitting and resting, and that I was close to my church. So I said, actually, I'm really thirsty. I could really use some water. So he said, I'll meet you and bring you some water. And I put my phone up, and I got up and picked up my cross, and I started to walk. And right then it hit me. it hit me like really hard, and I felt God's love just pouring all over me. And I thought about how much God loves us, that I didn't ask for any water. I didn't pray and ask God and tell God I needed any water. But He knew I needed water. So even though I didn't ask Him for water, He was going to provide me with water and provide me with what I need, because He knew I needed it. And as I thought about how much He loved me, and I walked down that road, man, I cried like a baby, and I started to bawl. And I felt God's presence, and I felt God's love coming all over me. And if you've never had a moment where you have felt God's love, it's something that's hard to explain. It just feels like love that's come over you, and you can't help but cry and bawl like a baby, like I've never cried before. So as I walked down the street, I was crying as I'm walking, and as I think about how much God loves me. There's a van that pulls over and stops right after the most dangerous curve on 9 Mile Road. Pulled over at the most dangerous spot they could pull over. And the guy runs over to me and he gives me a big hug and encourages me and says, God bless you, for what you're doing, and crying and hugging him. And people probably were driving by wondering what the heck's going on here. So he gets back in his van and leaves, and I'm encouraged, and I keep walking, and I walk a little bit farther, and I meet up with my father-in-law, and I get some water. Then I walk a little bit further and I make my way to the church, and I made it there. And as I think about this journey I did, going into it, I had no idea why I was carrying a cross and why God was having me do this. But looking back on it, I can see why. I had to go that far because God had to get me to a place to where I was broken down, because He wanted to show me how much He loved me. And He wanted to give me a picture of just a taste of the love that He had for us, and how much He loved us, that He sent His Son Jesus to be the sacrifice for our sins. And God wanted to show me just a taste of that love, and He wanted me to feel His love, but He had to get me to a point that I was after carrying that cross that distance to where He could show me His love. The next night I received a text message, and it was at 11:26, so I didn't really look at it till the next morning. And the following morning I looked at it, and it was a video of Alan Jackson singing The Old Rugged Cross live. It was a YouTube video. And when I listened to it, as I listened to the words of the old rugged cross, and how you cherish the old rugged cross, and how you'll trade this cross one day for a crown. And I listened to the words, and it was a blessing to me listening to those words. And I said, man, somebody must have known that I carried the cross, and they sent me this video as encouragement. So I texted him, I said, who is this? And I think she replied, Alan Jackson. And so I said, no, who is this sending me the video? And it turns out it was a girl that was trying to send this video to a friend of hers that was in the hospital, and she was sending him this video as encouragement, but she accidentally sent it to me. I don't know if you've ever had a video accidentally sent to you on your phone, but I've never had somebody accidentally send me a YouTube video. And the chances of somebody sending me a video directly related to what I had done the night before would be very slim. So I definitely believe that listening to this video and listening to the words of this song, that this song was sent from God. So it was sent from this girl by accident, but it was arranged by God. I looked at this video, and I'm looking at the time, and it comes at 11:26. This video was sent to me, so I'm like, okay, well, it's 11:26. God sent me, if God's sending me this video, let me look at John 11:26, because I had been reading in the book of John. And for some reason, I finished the book of John and then went back and started about halfway through the book of John and wanted to stay in the book of John leading up to Easter for some reason. So I went and just looked up John 11:26. John 11:26 says, everyone who lives and believes in me will never die, ever. Do you believe this? And I felt like that was another verse that was, God speaking directly to me. Everyone who believes in Him will live and never die. Do you believe this? And that verse was a blessing to me to read it. I said, okay, I think that could be a verse definitely sent from God for me to read. I wasn't positive, but I was encouraged by it. The following day I go to church, and it's Easter Sunday, and the pastor comes up and says, let's open our Bibles to John chapter 11, verse 26 and 27. And those were our scriptures for the day. John chapter 11, verse 26 is this very verse that he had given me the day prior. And then my pastor was teaching me these verses. And these weren't normal Easter verses. These are verses that didn't have anything to do with the crucifixion or resurrection of Jesus. This was when Jesus was talking to Martha and asking her if she believes before he resurrected Lazarus. So this is not typical verses that a pastor would use for an Easter Sunday message. And what's so cool also is I got after church, I was explaining to my sister-in-law what had happened, and we were talking about it. And then that night, she got home and she sent me a screenshot of her verse of the day, which her verses of the day were John chapter 11, verse 25 and 26. It's so amazing how God does things like that. It's like a little wink from God, just an encouragement where he puts things together like that for us sometimes. I hope this message encourages you and strengthens your faith, and I hope it brings a realization to the great, deep love that God has for all of us.